The alien queen assumed the human was all talk until he shredded the reproductive contract. The roar of the crowd thundered through the massive arena on Eridania. A cacophony of alien voices unified in bloodthirsty excitement. Sweat poured down Rick Summers' bare torso as he circled his opponent, a hulking, four-armed Gorgolian with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed with murderous intent. "You fight well for a soft-skinned human," the alien growled, its mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among its kind. "But this is where your journey ends." Rick didn't waste breath on a reply. 3 weeks of fighting through the tournament of genetic excellence had taught him to conserve energy. Instead, he feinted left, then ducked under a massive swing that would have separated his head from his shoulders. The Gorgolian stumbled forward, off balance for just a fraction of a second. All the opening Rick needed. He drove his fist into the creature's unprotected thorax, feeling something crack beneath his knuckles. The alien howled, but Rick was already moving, executing a perfect leg sweep that sent his opponent crashing to the arena floor. Before the Gorgolian could recover, Rick had the ceremonial blade at his throat. "Yield!" he commanded, pressing just hard enough to draw a trickle of luminescent blue blood. The arena fell silent. No human had ever reached the finals of the tournament, let alone stood poised to win. The Gorgolian's eyes flashed with hatred, then dimmed in resignation. "I yield to the human," it rasped. The crowd erupted. Rick stepped back, chest heaving, as tournament officials rushed forward to declare him champion. His vision swam with exhaustion as he raised his arms in victory. He'd done it, survived the impossible gauntlet that had claimed the lives of dozens of competitors. What Rick didn't know, as he basked in his triumph, was that his real challenge was just beginning. Later cleaned up and dressed in the ceremonial victor's robes, Rick was escorted to the royal reception hall. The massive chamber glittered with strange crystalline formations that cast prismatic light across the gathered alien dignitaries. "The champion approaches," announced a tall, thin alien with translucent skin. "Rick Summers of Earth, victor of the Tournament of Genetic Excellence." Rick strode forward, trying to project confidence despite his exhaustion. At the far end of the hall, seated upon an elevated throne, was the most striking alien he'd ever seen. Queen Selena of the Eridanian Empire was almost human in appearance. If humans had skin the color of burnished copper and eyes like frozen oceans. Her silvery hair cascaded down her shoulders in elaborate braids interwoven with precious metals. She studied Rick with clinical interest, as one might examine a particularly interesting specimen in a laboratory. "Approach, human champion," she commanded, her voice melodic yet cold. Rick climbed the steps to her throne and bowed as he'd been instructed. "Your Majesty." "You have surprised us all," Selena said, rising from her throne. She circled him slowly, her long fingers occasionally brushing against his arm or shoulder. "No human has ever displayed such genetic potential." There was something in her tone that made Rick uneasy, but he maintained his composure. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I'm honored to represent Earth in your tournament." "Yes, yeah," she said dismissively. "But more importantly, you have proven yourself worthy of a rare honor." She snapped her fingers, and an attendant rushed forward with an ornate scroll. "The reproductive contract. Only the most exceptional genetic specimens are offered this opportunity." Rick blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, the what?" Selena's perfect lips curved into what might have been a smile on a human face. On hers, it looked predatory. "You will provide genetic material for the royal bloodline," she explained, as if speaking to a child. "Your DNA will strengthen our species. It is the highest honor we can bestow upon a tournament champion." Rick stared at the contract, then at the alien queen. Her beauty was undeniable, but there was no warmth in those icy eyes, only calculation. "And what exactly would this contract entail?" he asked carefully. "You will reside in the palace breeding quarters, Selena said, gesturing to the document. "Your needs will be met. You will provide samples on a regular schedule. The royal geneticists will handle the rest." "Samples," Rick repeated flatly. "And my role beyond that?" "Beyond that?" Selena looked genuinely puzzled. "There is no beyond that. Your genetic material is what interests us, human. You yourself are merely the vessel." The realization hit Rick like a punch to the gut. He wasn't being offered a position of honor. He was being collected like a prized stud animal. But surrounded by alien guards in the heart of the Eridanian palace, he saw no immediate way out. With a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, Rick accepted the scroll. "I'm flattered, Your Majesty," he lied. Truly. The breeding quarters turned out to be a luxurious prison. Rick paced the perimeter of his suite for the 100th time, cataloging every detail. Plush furnishings in alien designs, exotic foods delivered 3 times daily, entertainment systems loaded with content from across the galaxy. All the comforts a prize specimen could want. Everything except freedom. 2 weeks had passed since the tournament. 2 weeks of being poked, prodded, and scanned by Eridanian scientists with their cold hands and colder eyes. 2 weeks of providing samples in sterile rooms while medical technicians waited impatiently outside. Rick stopped at the viewport that dominated one wall of his quarters. Beyond the transparent barrier lay the sprawling capital city of Eridania, its spires reaching toward twin moons that hung like mismatched eyes in the purple sky. Somewhere out there was a spaceport, and beyond that, the stars and Earth. A soft chime announced a visitor. Rick turned as the door slid open to reveal Queen Selena, flanked by 2 guards with plasma rifles. This was her 3rd visit since his installation in the breeding quarters. "Your Majesty," Rick said, offering a bow that was just shallow enough to border on disrespect. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Selena dismissed her guards with a flick of her wrist. They hesitated. No one was supposed to be alone with the dangerous human, but ultimately backed out, the door sealing behind them. "The preliminary genetic analysis is complete," she announced, gliding into the room like liquid mercury. "Your DNA contains several unexpected markers of interest." "Glad to hear I'm such a fascinating lab rat," Rick replied, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Selena's head tilted slightly. "You are displeased with your accommodations? They are the finest in the palace." "The accommodations are fine. It's the bars on the cage I object to." "Bars?" She looked genuinely confused. "There are no bars." Rick laughed without humor. "It's a figure of speech, Your Majesty. I'm a prisoner here." "You signed the reproductive contract willingly." Under duress, surrounded by armed guards, with no explanation of what it actually entailed. Rick took a step toward her. "Where I come from, that's not considered willing." Selena's icy eyes narrowed. "You should be honored. Your genetic material will strengthen the royal bloodline for generations. Few non-Eridanians are deemed worthy of such a privilege." "Privilege?" Rick spat the word. "You treat me like a prize bull, harvesting my genetic material without a shred of respect for my autonomy or dignity." "Your human sensibilities are irrelevant," Selena said coldly. "The contract is binding." Rick crossed to a small table where the ornate scroll lay. He'd spent days studying it, looking for loopholes, weaknesses. Finding none hadn't deterred him. "You know what I think of your contract?" He snatched up the scroll, locked eyes with the queen, and with deliberate slowness, tore it in half, then quarters, then eighths, letting the pieces flutter to the floor between them. Selena's face transformed from cold arrogance to shock, then to a fury so intense it seemed to radiate heat. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous register. "No one has ever—" "That's your problem right there," Rick interrupted. "No one has ever stood up to you. No one has ever told you that people, human or otherwise, aren't just collections of useful genes to be harvested at your convenience." The queen's hand flew to a communication device at her wrist. "Guards, seize the human!" The door slid open instantly, and 4 armed guards rushed in, weapons trained on Rick. "Take him to containment," Selena ordered, her voice trembling with rage. "The contract is voided, but he will still serve a purpose. Prepare him for the experimental procedures." As the guards surrounded him, Rick maintained eye contact with the queen. "You can take my DNA," he said quietly, "but you'll never understand what makes humans truly special. It's not in our genes, it's in our spirit, something you clearly lack." The last thing Rick saw before a stun baton connected with his temple was Selena's face, her perfect features contorted with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. Rage, certainly, but mixed with something else, something that almost looked like doubt. When Rick regained consciousness, he was strapped to a cold metal table in a sterile laboratory. Gone were the luxurious accommodations of the breeding quarters. His new cell was a bare-bones detention unit with a single cot and sanitation facilities. A thin, severe-looking Eridanian male in a white coat approached, studying a holographic display that hovered above a wrist device. "The Queen has reclassified you," he informed Rick without preamble. "You are now Subject 1173-H, designated for experimental genetic extraction. The process is less comfortable than the voluntary donations you were previously providing." "Less comfortable," Rick repeated dryly. "How diplomatic of you." The scientist ignored his sarcasm. "We begin tomorrow. I suggest you rest while you can." As the scientist departed, Rick tested his restraints. They were solid, but not unbreakable. He'd been in worse situations during his military career back on Earth. The tournament had been his ticket off a planet that had little use for decorated soldiers after the peace accords. Now he had a new mission: escape this nightmare and find a way home, but not before showing Queen Selena exactly what human spirit was capable of. The experimental procedure was everything the scientist had implied, and worse. Rick lay panting on the laboratory table, his body slick with sweat as the extraction device finally powered down. The Eridanian technicians moved around him with clinical detachment, cataloging samples and making notes on their holographic interfaces. "Subject shows remarkable resilience," noted the lead scientist, Dr. Perrin. "Most specimens require sedation by the third extraction point." "I'm not a specimen," Rick growled through gritted teeth. "And you can stick your sedation where the sun doesn't shine." Dr. Perrin merely raised an eyebrow, or what passed for one on his angular face. Continued verbalization during extreme discomfort. Fascinating. As the technicians filed out, Rick tested his restraints again. 3 days of captivity had given him ample opportunity to study the laboratory's routines and the security measures. The restraints were biolocked to the technicians, but he'd noticed a pattern in their activation sequences. The door slid open unexpectedly, revealing not another technician, but a young Eridanian male in formal palace attire. He glanced nervously over his shoulder before approaching Rick. "You are the human who defied the Queen," he whispered. Rick eyed him suspiciously. "That's one way of putting it." "My name is Taryn. I serve on the Queen's Advisory Council." The Eridanian's voice was barely audible. "There is something you should know. The tournament, your selection, it was not random." "What do you mean?" Taryn glanced at the door again. "Queen Selena has been obsessed with human genetics for years. Your species' adaptability, your resilience, she believes these traits could save our people." "Save you from what?" Rick asked. "Extinction." Taryn's icy eyes, similar to Selena's but warmer somehow, were grave. "Our birth rates have been declining for generations. Genetic degradation from too much selective breeding. The royal line is the worst affected." Rick processed this information. "So I was targeted specifically?" "Your military record, your survival skills, your genetic profile, all were factors in bringing you to Eridania. The tournament was merely a public justification." "Why are you telling me this?" Taryn hesitated. "Because not everyone agrees with the Queen's methods. There are those of us who believe cooperation, not exploitation, is the answer." A distant alarm began to wail. Taryn stiffened. "I must go, but know this. Events are in motion that will change everything. Be ready." He pressed something into Rick's palm, a small metallic disc, before hurrying from the room. Rick closed his fist around the object, concealing it just as Dr. Perrin rushed back in, his face tense. "Secure the specimen," he barked to the guards who followed him. "The palace is under attack." The laboratory erupted into activity. Through the confusion, Rick examined the disc in his hand. It appeared to be a security override, similar to those worn by the lab technicians. His ticket to freedom, if he could time it right. The facility shook with a distant explosion. The lights flickered, then stabilized. "Rebel faction," one guard informed Dr. Perrin. "They've breached the East Wing." "Evacuate the priority specimens," Perrin ordered. "This one included." As they began to unlock his restraints to transfer him, Rick made his move. He slapped the override disc against the control panel of his restraint table. The system sparked, and all the restraints released simultaneously. Before the stunned guards could react, Rick was in motion. Years of combat training took over as he disarmed the nearest guard and used him as a shield against the others. A few well-placed strikes later, and all 3 guards plus Dr. Perrin were unconscious on the laboratory floor. Rick quickly stripped a guard of his uniform and weapon. The fit was strange on his human frame, but it would have to do. He was about to leave when a new alarm sounded, this one more urgent than the last. "Attention all personnel," came an automated voice over the facility's communication system. "Code Crimson. Royal Protection Protocol engaged. Queen Selena's life has been compromised. All loyal forces converge on the throne room immediately." Rick hesitated at the doorway. He could make for the spaceport now, escape while the palace was in chaos. It was a logical choice, but something Turan had said nagged at him. Events in motion. The Queen's life threatened. Was this part of the plan he'd hinted at? "Damn it," Rick muttered, checking the charge on his stolen weapon. Against all better judgment, he turned away from freedom and headed deeper into the palace toward the throne room. The corridors were in chaos. Palace staff fled in all directions, while security forces moved against the flow, weapons drawn. Using the confusion as cover, Rick made his way through the palace, following emergency signage toward the royal chambers. As he approached the throne room, the sounds of combat grew louder. A massive explosion rocked the corridor, throwing Rick against a wall. When the smoke cleared, he saw the ornate doors to the throne room had been breached. Inside, a scene of carnage greeted him. Royal guards lay dead or wounded across the polished floor. At the far end, Queen Selena was cornered on her throne dais, defending herself with surprising skill using a ceremonial energy staff. But she was outnumbered by a group of armed Eridanians in distinctive gray uniforms. "The genetic purists thank you for your service, Your Majesty," announced their leader, a tall Eridanian with a scarred face. "But your experiments with alien DNA end today, along with your reign." Rick recognized the insignia on their uniforms from palace security briefings. The purists were an extremist faction opposed to any genetic contamination of Eridanian bloodlines. They'd rather see their species die out than adapt with foreign DNA. As the leader raised his weapon for the killing shot, Rick made a split-second decision that would change everything. He fired his stolen weapon, hitting the purist leader in the shoulder and sending his shot wide. All eyes turned to Rick as he stepped into the throne room. "Sorry to crash the party, he said, moving to place himself between the Queen and her would-be assassins. "But I've got a bone to pick with Her Majesty, and I can't do that if she's dead." "The human!" spat the purist leader, blood seeping from his shoulder wound. "This abomination is exactly why our pure bloodline must be preserved." Rick kept his stolen weapon trained on the group of extremists. "I'm not a fan of Her Majesty either, but killing her won't solve your genetic problems." "Stand aside, creature," another purist demanded. "This is an Eridanian matter." "Make me," Rick replied with a dangerous smile. The purists charged as one. Rick fired twice more, dropping 2 attackers before they were upon him. He switched to hand-to-hand combat, using the fighting techniques that had won him the tournament. Despite being outnumbered, his superior training gave him an edge. Behind him, Queen Selena had recovered her composure and was wielding her energy staff with lethal precision. Together, they formed a surprisingly effective fighting unit, Rick creating openings that Selena exploited with swift, deadly strikes. When the last purist fell, Rick and Selena stood back to back, both breathing heavily. The throne room was silent except for the distant sounds of fighting elsewhere in the palace. "Why did you intervene?" Selena demanded, not lowering her staff. "You could have escaped during the chaos." Rick turned to face her. "Good question. Maybe I'm just not the kind of man who runs away when there's a fight to be finished. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity to bargain for your freedom," she suggested coldly. "There is that," he admitted with a wry smile. "But mostly I wanted to see the look on your face when a mere genetic specimen saved your royal hide." Before Selena could respond, the palace communication system crackled to life. "Attention all loyal subjects," came a familiar voice, Terran. "The palace has been compromised. The Purist faction has seized control of the security systems and communications hub. They are executing all non-pure bloods and royal loyalists. This is not a drill. Implement emergency protocol Exodus immediately. Selena's eyes widen. Exodus protocol? They're trying to force me into the open? What's Exodus? Rick asked, checking the charge on his weapon. Emergency evacuation procedure. All royal personnel are to converge at the spaceport. She looked at Rick with newfound calculation. The Purists will have that area heavily guarded. So we need another way out. Rick moved to the throne and examined the dais. Palaces this old usually have secret passages, emergency exits for the monarch? Selena hesitated, clearly reluctant to share such information with a prisoner who had every reason to hate her. But another explosion, closer this time, made the decision for her. Behind the throne, she admitted, there's a network of tunnels that lead to various points throughout the capital, including a private royal hangar. Rick nodded. Lead the way, Your Majesty. Selena activated a hidden mechanism, and a section of the wall behind the throne slid open. They entered just as another group of purists breached the throne room. The passage was narrow and dimly lit by bioluminescent strips along the floor. They moved quickly, Selena in the lead, navigating the labyrinthine tunnels with practiced ease. These tunnels date back centuries, she explained, as they descended a spiral staircase. Built during the succession wars when assassination attempts were common. Some things never change, Rick remarked dryly. They continued in tense silence until they reached a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. The left passage leads to the city center, Selena said. The right to the royal hangar. The center continues deeper beneath the palace to an emergency bunker. Rick considered their options. The hangar is our best bet. If we can secure a ship. A distant rumble interrupted him, followed by the sound of falling debris. They're bombing the palace, Selena realized, her voice tight with anger. These fanatics would destroy centuries of history to kill me. They're desperate, Rick said. Your genetic program threatens their entire worldview. Selena shot him a sharp look. How do you know about the program's details? I had an informative chat with your counselor Taryn before all hell broke loose. Rick met her gaze steadily. He told me your species is facing extinction due to genetic degradation. That's why you're so interested in human DNA. Selena's expression hardened. Taryn had no right to tell me why I was kidnapped, experimented on, and treated like a prize stallion, Rick interrupted. I think I had a right to know. Another explosion, closer this time, sent dust raining down from the ceiling. We can debate ethics later, Rick said. Right now, we need to move. They took the right passage toward the hangar. As they hurried through the increasingly unstable tunnel, Selena spoke again, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Why did you really save me after what I did to you? Rick didn't slow his pace. Where I come from, we don't leave people to die, even people who've wronged us, especially when there are bigger issues at stake than personal grudges. Your species is confounding, Selena admitted. We get that a lot, Rick replied with a hint of a smile. They emerged from the tunnel into a small private hangar housing several sleek spacecraft. Rick whistled appreciatively. Nice collection. I'm guessing that one's yours? He pointed to the largest vessel, emblazoned with royal insignia. The Royal Starbird, Selena confirmed, but it requires a full crew to operate. Then we'll take that one. Rick indicated a smaller, more streamlined craft. Looks like a 2-person scout ship, easier to slip past whatever blockade the purists have established. As they approached the vessel, the hangar doors suddenly began to open. Rick pulled Selena behind a fuel container as a squadron of purist soldiers entered, weapons ready. Check every ship, ordered their commander. The Queen will try to escape this way. Rick assessed their situation. 6 armed purists against the 2 of them, with minimal cover in the open hangar. I count 6, he whispered to Selena. Too many to take head-on. The scout ship has a remote activation sequence. Selena whispered back. If I can access the hangar control panel, I can create a diversion. Rick nodded. I'll cover you. While the purists began methodically searching the larger vessels, Selena slipped along the wall toward the control panel. Rick provided cover. moving between cargo containers to draw attention away from her. When Selena reached the panel, she entered a rapid sequence of commands. Suddenly, the Royal Starbird's engines roared to life, its lights flashing in an emergency startup sequence. The purists immediately converged on the royal vessel, momentarily forgetting their search pattern. "Now!" Rick hissed. They sprinted for the scout ship. Rick laid down covering fire as Selena activated the entry ramp. They tumbled inside just as the purists realized their mistake and opened fire on the smaller vessel. "Can you fly this thing?" Rick asked as they rushed to the cockpit. "Of course," Selena replied, sliding into the pilot's seat with practiced ease. Her fingers danced across the controls, and the ship hummed to life. "Strap in." The scout ship lifted off as plasma bolts peppered its hull. Selena executed a tight turn and accelerated toward the still-open hangar doors. They shot out into the purple Eridanian sky, the palace now partially in ruins, shrinking behind them. "They'll send pursuit craft," Selena said grimly, eyes fixed on the navigation console. "Where are we headed?" Rick asked, scanning the unfamiliar controls for weapon systems. Selena hesitated. "There's a research outpost in the northern mountains. Loyal scientists working on alternative solutions to our genetic crisis." "Alternative to kidnapping aliens, you mean?" Selena's knuckles whitened on the controls. "Yes." As they soared over the capital city, Rick saw the extent of the uprising. Plumes of smoke rose from government buildings. In the central plaza, crowds had gathered, some fighting, others fleeing. "Your people are tearing themselves apart," he observed. "This conflict has been brewing for generations," Selena replied, her voice tight. "The purists believe any genetic modification or introduction of foreign DNA is sacrilege. They would rather see our species die out pure than survive through adaptation." "And what do you believe?" Rick asked. Selena was silent for a long moment. "I believe in survival," she finally said. "But perhaps I have been too single-minded in my approach." It was as close to an apology as Rick expected to get. The ship's warning system suddenly blared. "Pursuit craft detected," Selena announced, banking the scout ship sharply. 3 interceptors, closing fast. "Weapons?" Rick asked urgently. "Minimal. This is a scout ship, not a fighter. Then we'll have to outrun them. Can we make it to the mountains?" Selena's expression was grim. "We can try." "Hold on!" Selena yanked the controls hard, sending their scout ship into a steep dive. The pursuing interceptors adjusted course, energy weapons lancing through the space they just vacated. Rick gripped his seat as G-forces pressed him back. "They're herding us away from the mountains," he observed, studying the tactical display, "trying to force us toward open terrain where they can surround us." "The Crimson Canyons are ahead," Selena replied, her eyes never leaving the controls. "If we can reach them..." "The what now?" "A maze of narrow stone formations, dangerous to navigate, but the scout ship is more maneuverable than their interceptors." Rick nodded. "Classic guerrilla tactic. Use the environment against a superior force." The ship rocked as a glancing shot hit their port stabilizer. Warning lights flashed across the console. "Port stabilizer damaged," Selena reported tersely, "compensating." The canyons loomed ahead, a vast network of towering redstone formations split by narrow passages barely wide enough for their ship. Selena guided them into the labyrinth at breakneck speed, the vessel tilting almost 90 degrees to slip between 2 massive pillars of stone. Behind them, one interceptor attempted to follow and immediately scraped its wing against the canyon wall, sending it spinning into a stone column in a spectacular explosion. "One down," Rick said with grim satisfaction. "Don't celebrate yet," Selena warned as she executed another hairpin turn. "The other 2 are still in pursuit, and they're calling for reinforcements." Rick studied the canyon system on the navigation display. "There," he pointed to a particularly dense section. "That formation looks like a bottleneck. If we can get through and cause a rock slide behind us..." "The scout ship's energy cannons aren't powerful enough to cause a significant collapse," Selena objected. "We don't need the cannons." Rick unbuckled his harness. "Get us to that bottleneck. I'll handle the rest." "What are you planning?" "Something stupid and human," he replied with a wolfish grin. "My specialty." Rick made his way to the ship's small cargo hold and quickly inventoried the supplies. emergency rations, survival gear, and, jackpot, a case of geological survey charges. Explosive devices used for taking mineral samples, but with enough kick to bring down some unstable rock if placed correctly. By the time he returned to the cockpit, Selena had navigated them deep into the canyon system. The pursuing interceptors were still on their tail, but the narrow passages forced them to slow down, giving the more agile scout ship a slight advantage. "There's the bottleneck," Selena announced, indicating a narrow passage ahead where the canyon walls nearly touched. "Whatever you're planning, do it quickly." Rick handed her the case of charges. "I need you to arm these while I prep the airlock." Selena looked at him incredulously. "You're not seriously planning to?" "Time's a factor, Your Majesty," he interrupted. "Those charges need to be armed with a 5-second delay." To her credit, Selena didn't waste time arguing. Her slender copper fingers worked with surprising dexterity, programming each charge as Rick specified. When she finished, Rick took the armed explosives and headed for the airlock. "Slow to minimum speed as we approach the bottleneck, then accelerate hard once I give the signal." "This is insanity," Selena muttered, but she nodded agreement. The ship slowed as they approached the narrowest part of the passage. Rick positioned himself in the airlock, the outer door partially open, and explosives secured to his belt. Wind howled around him as he watched the canyon walls blur past. "Now!" he shouted when they reached the bottleneck. In one fluid motion, he tossed the charges at the unstable rock formations above and to the sides of the passage, then slammed the airlock shut. "Go! Go! Go!" Selena gunned the engines. The scout ship shot forward just as the charges detonated in sequence. Behind them, the canyon walls collapsed in a thunderous avalanche, completely blocking the passage in a cloud of red dust and rubble. Rick returned to the cockpit, breathing hard but grinning. "That should buy us some time." Selena stared at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "That was unnecessarily risky." "You're welcome," he replied dryly. "I meant," she clarified, "that you could have simply used the external cargo release to drop the charges. There was no need to expose yourself to potential harm." Rick blinked, then laughed. "Well, damn, that would have been smarter." Indeed. Was that the ghost of a smile on her lips? "Though I must admit, your solution was effective, if characteristically human in its unnecessary bravado." "We call it thinking outside the box," Rick said, settling back into his seat. "Sometimes the direct approach works best." The smile disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. "The outpost is still several hours away, and our port stabilizer is failing. We need to land for repairs." Rick checked the navigation display. "Any friendly territory nearby?" "The Verdant Valley," Selena said after a moment's consideration. "It's uninhabited, but the ecology is stable, and there's a small emergency supply cache hidden there. We can make repairs and continue to the outpost under cover of darkness." She adjusted their course, guiding the damaged scout ship out of the canyons and toward a lush green expanse nestled between two mountain ranges. As they descended, the ship's handling became increasingly erratic. "Stabilizer's gone," Selena announced, fighting the controls. "Brace for a rough landing." The scout ship plummeted the last 100 meters, skimming treetops before slamming into a meadow. It skidded across the ground, carving a long furrow in the earth before finally coming to rest at the edge of a small lake. When the dust settled, Rick checked himself for injuries. Nothing serious, just some bruises and a cut on his forehead. He turned to Selena and found her slumped forward, a trickle of luminescent blue blood running from a gash on her temple. "Selena!" He unbuckled her harness and gently lifted her head. Her eyes fluttered open, disoriented. "You called me by my name," she murmured. "Not Your Majesty or Queen." "Seemed like the right time to drop the formalities," Rick replied, examining her wound. "Can you move? We need to get away from the ship in case those purists find a way around the rockslide." Selena nodded weakly. Rick helped her from the pilot's seat, supporting her weight as they made their way out of the damaged vessel. The Verdant Valley lived up to its name, a paradise of emerald foliage and vibrant flowers under a purple sky now tinged with orange as the Eridanian sun began to set. "The supply cache," Selena said, pointing toward a copse of twisted trees that resembled Earth's willows, hidden beneath the oldest tree. They made their way slowly to the trees. Rick located the cache, a waterproof container buried beneath the central tree's root system. Inside were medical supplies, emergency rations, basic tools, and a compact communication device. "This will help," he said, removing a medical kit. He cleaned and dressed Selena's head wound with gentle efficiency. "You're lucky. It looks worse than it is." "You have medical training?" she asked, watching him work. "Basic field medicine, part of military training on Earth." He finished securing the bandage. "How do you feel?" "I will survive," she said with dignity. "We should establish shelter before nightfall. Eridanian nights are cold, and some of the valley's nocturnal fauna can be problematic." Rick surveyed their surroundings. The ship's too exposed. Those trees would provide better cover and protection from the elements. Working together, they constructed a simple but effective shelter using the emergency supplies and natural materials. As darkness fell, they sat beside a small heating unit from the cache, the purple-black Eridanian night closing in around them. "The communication device is short-range only," Selena said, examining it with frustration. "We cannot contact the outpost from here." "Then we repair the ship at first light," Rick replied pragmatically. "The damage looked bad, but the core systems are intact." Selena nodded, then winced at the movement. They sat in silence for a while, the strange calls of alien wildlife echoing around them. "Why did you tear up the contract?" Selena asked suddenly. "You must have known the consequences would be severe." Rick considered the question. "Where I come from, people aren't property. We're not breeding stock or genetic material to be harvested. We're individuals with rights and dignity." He met her gaze steadily. "I tore it up because it was wrong, and sometimes you have to take a stand, even when it costs you." "Even at the risk of your life?" "Especially then. That's when it matters most." Selena was quiet for a long moment. "Your species is strange. You risk everything for principles, for abstract concepts like dignity and rights." "That's what makes us human," Rick said simply. "On Eridania, the collective survival of our species has always taken precedence over individual concerns," Selena explained. "When I learned of the genetic degradation threatening our future, I did what any queen would do. I sought solutions by any means necessary, even if those means were unethical." "Ethics is a luxury when extinction looms," she replied, but with less conviction than before. "Is it?" Rick challenged. "Or is it precisely when survival is at stake that ethics matter most? What's the point of surviving if you lose what makes your civilization worth preserving in the process?" Tsuhumi. Selena had no immediate answer. Above them, twin moons cast silvery light through the canopy, illuminating her copper skin and making her silver hair glow with an almost ethereal quality. "You are not what I expected, Rick Summers," she finally said. "Likewise, Your Majesty." He smiled slightly. "You're a hell of a pilot." For the first time, Selena laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed her face, softening the regal mask she habitually wore. "One of my many talents you were not privy to when viewing me merely as your captor." "I look forward to discovering your other talents," Rick replied, then quickly added, "In a strictly diplomatic sense, of course." "Of course," Selena agreed, but there was a new warmth in her icy eyes that hadn't been there before. Dawn broke over the verdant valley in a spectacular display of crimson and gold. Rick awoke first, instantly alert, a habit from his military days. Selena slept nearby, her silver hair splayed across the makeshift bedding, her usual regal composure softened in slumber. He slipped quietly from the shelter to assess their situation. The scout ship sat where they'd crashed it, morning dew glistening on its damaged hull. After a quick perimeter check, Rick gathered some fruit-like objects that the emergency guide identified as safe for both species to eat. When he returned, Selena was awake, removing her bandage to examine her wound in a small reflective device. "The bleeding has stopped," she noted. "Our species heals quickly." "Convenient," Rick said, offering her the gathered food. "Breakfast. According to the guide, these won't kill either of us." Selena accepted the offering with surprising grace. Joba fruit, a delicacy actually. They ate in companionable silence, watching the valley come alive with strange, colorful creatures that resembled a cross between birds and lizards. We should examine the ship, Selena said finally, determine what repairs are necessary. At the crash site, they conducted a thorough assessment. The news wasn't good. The stabilizer is beyond repair with our limited tools, Rick concluded, wiping grease from his hands, and the communication array is completely fried. We have parts for basic repairs in the cache, Selena said, but nothing that would replace a stabilizer. Rick circled the ship thoughtfully. We don't need to replace it. We just need to balance the thrust output from the remaining stabilizers to compensate. Selena looked skeptical. That would require recalibrating the entire propulsion system. Without proper diagnostic equipment, sometimes you have to improvise, Rick interrupted, already climbing back into the ship. On Earth, we call it a jury rig. Not pretty, but it gets the job done. They spent the morning working on the ship, Selena following Rick's unorthodox repair suggestions with increasing curiosity. Despite her initial doubts, his solutions, while unconventional by Eridanian standards, showed remarkable ingenuity. You're using the auxiliary power coupling to modulate the thrust differentials, she observed as he rewired a control panel. That's actually quite clever. Thanks, Rick grunted, focused on his work. Hand me that spanner-looking thing. As they worked side by side in the cramped engine compartment, the physical proximity created a strange tension between them. More than once, their hands brushed, and Rick couldn't help noticing how the exertion brought a deeper copper flush to Selena's cheeks. By midday, they had the ship in marginally flyable condition. It won't win any beauty contest, Rick said, wiping sweat from his brow, but it should get us to your outpost. Your resourcefulness is impressive, Selena admitted. Eridanian engineers are trained to follow precise protocols. This improvisation is not in our nature. Maybe that's part of your problem, Rick suggested. Too much rigid thinking, not enough adaptation. Selena considered this. Perhaps the purists are merely an extreme manifestation of our society's resistance to change. They gathered their supplies and prepared for departure. As Selena ran pre-flight checks, Rick secured the shelter area, erasing evidence of their presence. A sudden rustling in the underbrush caught his attention. He froze, hand moving to his weapon, as a small Eridanian patrol craft appeared over the treetops. Company, he called softly to Selena. Purist scout. They must have found a way around the rock slide. Selena quickly powered down the ship's systems. If they detect our energy signature, too late, they're landing. Rick ducked behind cover, observing as the patrol craft set down in a clearing about half a kilometer away. 4 troops, light armament, probably just a reconnaissance unit. If they report our position, more will come, Selena said grimly. Rick weighed their options. We could try to take off now, but they'd spot us immediately. Or, Selena prompted, or we eliminate the threat. His expression was hard. 4 against 2 aren't great odds, but I've faced worse. We have the element of surprise, Selena noted, her tactical mind engaging, and I am not without combat skills as you saw in the throne room. Rick nodded. Let's move. Stay low and follow my lead. They approached the purist position using the dense vegetation as cover. The patrol had established a perimeter and was conducting sensor sweeps of the area. They haven't spotted the ship yet, Rick whispered. But they will soon. We need to take them out quickly and quietly. Selena pointed to a pair of soldiers setting up a communication array. Those 2 first. If they manage to send a transmission? Agreed. I'll circle around and approach from the west. You take the east, on my signal. They separated, each stalking toward their targets with predatory focus. Rick moved through the underbrush with practiced stealth, positioning himself behind a purist soldier who was scanning the tree line. Across the clearing, he caught a glimpse of Selena's silver hair as she took position. He raised his hand, counted down with his fingers, then closed his fist. The signal. They struck simultaneously. Rick subdued his target with a swift chokehold, while Selena used a nerve pinch technique that dropped her opponent instantly. Before the other 2 purists could react, Rick and Selena were upon them. The skirmish was brief but intense. One purist managed to fire his weapon, the energy bolt sizzling past Rick's ear close enough to singe his hair. Rick disarmed him with a brutal efficiency that left the soldier unconscious, while Selena dispatched the final enemy with a graceful combination of strikes that belied her royal status. "You fight well," Rick acknowledged, breathing hard. "For a queen." "And you for a breeding specimen," she retorted. But there was a playful glint in her icy eyes. They secured the unconscious purists with restraints from their own equipment, then examined the patrol craft. "Faster than our damaged scout ship," Rick observed, "and better armed." "Well, then we take it," Selena decided. "The outpost is only an hour's flight in this vessel." They transferred their essential supplies to the patrol craft and took off, leaving the damaged scout ship behind. As they soared over the valley, Rick glanced at Selena in the pilot's seat. Something had changed between them, a mutual respect born of shared danger and cooperation. "Your outpost," he said after a while. "What exactly are they researching there?" Selena hesitated before answering. "Alternative genetic therapies, non-invasive methods to address our degradation. As opposed to harvesting DNA from unwilling aliens?" She winced slightly. "Yes, the outpost director, Dr. Noreen, has been advocating for ethical approaches for years. I didn't always listen as carefully as I should have." "Why not?" "Because his methods are slower, less certain." Selena's knuckles whitened on the controls. "My people are running out of time. Each generation, our birth rates decline further. Those born often have defects." Her voice caught on the last word, and Rick studied her profile with new understanding. "It's personal for you, isn't it?" he asked quietly. Selena was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the ship's engines. "I cannot bear children," she admitted. "The royal line is the most affected by the degradation. The irony is not lost on me. The queen tasked with ensuring her species' survival cannot herself reproduce." "I'm sorry," Rick said, genuinely moved by her vulnerability. "The reproductive program was my attempt to find a solution before revealing my failure to my people." She looked at him directly. "Your DNA showed remarkable compatibility with ours. The scientists believed you could be the key. So that's why you were so angry when I tore up the contract." "Yes." A faint smile touched her lips. No one had ever defied me so directly. It was refreshing in retrospect. The patrol craft crested a mountain range, revealing a research facility nestled in a secluded valley. The outpost was a collection of elegant structures that seemed to grow organically from the mountainside. "There it is," Selena said, relief evident in her voice, "and no signs of purist activity." They landed on a small pad near the main building. As they disembarked, a tall Eridanian male hurried to meet them, his expression shifting from alarm to relief when he recognized Selena. "Your Majesty, we feared the worst when we lost contact with the palace." "Dr. Naren," Selena greeted him, "the situation is grave. The purists have staged a coup." The doctor bowed, then eyed Rick with undisguised curiosity. "And this is—" "Rick Summers," Selena replied. "He saved my life, twice. He is to be treated as an honored guest, not a research subject." Dr. Naren's eyebrows rose, but he nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty. Please come inside. We have much to discuss." The interior of the facility was a stark contrast to the opulent palace. Functional, minimalist, dedicated to science rather than ceremony. Dr. Naren led them to a conference room where several other scientists were gathered. A holographic display showed news feeds from the capital. Scenes of unrest and purist propaganda. "The purists control most government facilities," Naren reported, "but they're meeting resistance in the outer provinces. Many remain loyal to you, Your Majesty." "What about Taran?" Rick asked. "The counselor who warned us." Naren looked grim. "Captured, according to our sources. The purists are publicly executing those they deem traitors to genetic purity." Selena's face hardened. "Then we must act quickly. What forces can we muster?" The discussion turned to military matters, loyal units that could be called upon, strategic facilities that needed to be secured. Rick contributed tactical suggestions based on his Earth military experience, earning thoughtful nods from the Eridanian commanders, who joined via secure communication. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Naren approached Rick privately. "Her Majesty seems different with you," he observed, "more open." Rick shrugged. Shared danger changes people. Perhaps, Naren studied him intently, or perhaps you've shown her something she needed to see. That evening, after strategy sessions and preparations for their counteroffensive against the Purists, Rick found himself alone with Selena on a balcony overlooking the valley. The twin moons of Eridania cast everything in silver light, softening the alien landscape. Your Dr. Naren seems competent, Rick commented, and dedicated to ethical research. Yes, Selena sighed. I should have listened to him sooner. My desperation led me to questionable decisions, like kidnapping me? Like treating you as a means to an end, rather than a sentient being deserving of respect, she corrected. For that, I am truly sorry, Rick. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. Well, he said after a moment, apology accepted. Though I have to admit, tearing up that contract was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Selena laughed, a sound he was growing increasingly fond of. Your defiance was impressive, terrifying at the time, but impressive. Humans can be stubborn that way, he said with a smile, especially when our dignity is at stake. I'm beginning to understand that. She turned to face him fully, her icy eyes now warm with something he couldn't quite define. Your species values the individual so highly. It's foreign to our collective mindset, but there's wisdom in it I hadn't appreciated before. And there's wisdom in your collective approach too, Rick admitted. And on Earth, we sometimes focus so much on individual rights that we lose sight of our shared future. Perhaps the ideal lies somewhere between our perspectives, Selena suggested, moving closer to him. Perhaps it does, Rick agreed, suddenly very aware of her proximity. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Selena reached up, her copper fingers tracing the line of his jaw with gentle curiosity. You are unlike any being I have encountered, Rick Summers, she murmured. Your strength, your principles, your compassion, these are traits no genetic sample could capture. Rick caught her hand in his, holding it against his cheek. And you're not just a queen or a genetic program, he replied softly. You're a woman of courage and intelligence, trying to save her people against impossible odds. Their lips met in a kiss that bridged worlds, tentative at first, then deepening with shared hunger. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard. The boundaries between queen and prisoner, alien and human, irreversibly blurred. This is not part of any contract, Selena whispered against his lips. This is my choice, as a woman, not a queen. And mine as a man, not a specimen, Rick replied, drawing her back into his embrace. That night marked the beginning of something neither had anticipated when they first met, a genuine connection that transcended their biological differences. In the days that followed, as they worked together to rally forces against the Purists, their relationship deepened beyond physical attraction into something more profound. 3 months later, the Purist rebellion had been quelled. With Rick's tactical expertise and Selena's leadership, loyal forces reclaimed the capital. The Purist leaders were captured, and a new era of reform began on Eridania. In a private ceremony attended only by their closest allies, Rick and Selena formalized their union, not through a reproductive contract, but through vows of partnership and respect that honored both their cultures. And 6 months after that, Dr. Naren delivered news that had once seemed impossible. Through a combination of his ethical genetic therapies and the natural compatibility between Rick and Selena, the Queen was with child. A boy, Dr. Naren announced, beaming with professional pride, perfectly healthy with genetic markers from both parents. In the privacy of their chambers, Rick held Selena close as she wept tears of joy, tears that crystallized into tiny gems as they fell, an Eridanian expression of profound emotion. What shall we name him? Rick asked, his hand resting gently on her abdomen. Selena smiled through her tears. In Eridanian tradition, the firstborn son of a new genetic line is named for the quality most valued in that line. She looked up at him, her icy eyes warm with love. I would name him Valen. Valen, Rick repeated. What does it mean? It means one who stands firm in his principles, she translated, like his father. Rick smiled, deeply moved. Valen Summers, future Prince of Eridania. I like it. As they stood together, watching the sunset transform the capital city into a landscape of gold and copper, Rick reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. From prisoner to partner, from specimen to beloved, he had found his place in a world beyond the stars. And in doing so, he had helped forge a new understanding between their species, one based not on exploitation, but on mutual respect and love. "Humanity," Selena murmured, as if reading his thoughts. "Your species never ceases to amaze me." "We have our moments," Rick agreed, pulling her closer. "We have our moments."